Tell me about your reaction to yesterday's sad events.
Well, obviously, we've all been totally devastated. We can't believe it's happened again. And although people talk about Jo Cox, there have been others. There was one, a Liberal Democrat MP in Cheltenham, who he was got with a machete or a sword, and his member of staff was murdered. And then, of course, there was Stephen Timms, who was stabbed several times, and he's lucky to be alive. He's still an MP. Then there was Jo Cox, and now Sir David Amess. So it's not a totally isolated incident, and that's the worry, and that's what people are concerned about now.
And will Sir David's death change the way you conduct your own surgeries?
Well, to be honest, I haven't had normal surgeries as you might consider them, in that people don't come in and see me in a church hall or a church or wherever. I make specific appointments to see people who need to see me, because some years ago, I actually started to feel uncomfortable. I was having them in dark, drafty, freezing cold halls in the middle of November. And sometimes there was quite a narrow exit and you could get trapped in there. So I decided to stop that because I was feeling uncomfortable, added to which a lot of people would make an appointment and not turn up. So you could sit there for 2 hours in a freezing cold hall in the dark, and they wouldn't, only half of them would come. So I decided to do it a different way, and I've been doing it that way ever since, where somebody who really needs to see me, I do see. But we find out a lot about them before we go and see them, and I always take somebody with me. I never go on my own. But of course, most of my staff in Derby are women, so it's usually another woman with me, and I would prefer to have a male with me, but I don't. I've only got one very part-time male who's just started in Derby, so I don't have that option.
It's really interesting to hear this. This is a side of your work that we don't normally get to hear.
Hmm.
Have you ever had any situations where you felt uncomfortable?
Yes, I have. I've been very fortunate. It's just stopped. Ironically, a few weeks ago, I had a letter from some former serving police officers, retired now, who, when I had a public meeting, and I hold a Meet Your MP around the constituency about 8 times a year, for about 2 hours each time. And people come, I don't know who they are. We just take a segment off the electoral register and invite them. So we don't know them, but they have to register, and we don't tell them where it is until such time as they have definitely registered to come, so we know who they are and where they're from. So they come, and we do vet them to a limited extent. But I did have one occasion. Oh, I was just telling you about the police officers. They used to come and sit in the audience to protect me, and that was following Jo Cox's murder. They volunteered to do it, which was incredibly generous of them, because they would sit there for 2 hours 8 times a year, and there'd be 3 or 4 of them at a time, and they would escort me in and escort me out to my car. I don't have that option now, because they all feel, and I understand they're 5 years older, 6 years older, and they feel that they are not as valuable as they were because they're not as fit, and they're getting on in years now because they've been retired several years. But I did have one occasion where a man came. He'd not been to the meeting, but he'd found out somehow that I was going to be there, and he came in to threaten me about something I'd said. And had he actually laid a finger on me, they would have had him on the floor in seconds, because they were lined up behind him. He didn't know that because he was so angry at me. But I'm not going to have that protection now. And I do wonder, I mean, I heard a bit of your discussion before the break. I do wonder if, when people say we don't need a knee-jerk reaction, no, we don't need a knee-jerk reaction, but we've got to change. I don't feel that I can have a public meeting with 120, 130 people there that I don't know who they are, and not have any sort of person there to protect me. So are we going to have to go down the route that when we're in these exposed situations, it's the same at hustings at general elections. I feel now that probably police officers should be present, because at the hustings before elections, it can get very, very unpleasant.
So it's really interesting to hear, from the sharp end of what you're dealing with, and quite clearly these troubles are impacting people's
Yeah.
access to MPs. And if we move forwards from here and we have to provide security, how do we fund that?
Exactly. I mean, that is the difficulty. It's a really difficult situation to know how we are going to deal with it. But we cannot have democracy denied by people like this, who are generally extremists. And you know, that's what happened with Sir David. It happened with Joe Cox. They were extreme people. We don't need those people to go in and murder our members of parliament, because it is then going to stifle democracy. And my concern now is there will be members of parliament, and I have to say many female members of parliament probably, and maybe younger male members who've not been in very long, may question whether they want to continue after the next election. And people will reassess it. And anybody out there who'd been thinking they might like to become an MP, are they thinking, well, I'm not sure I do, is it worth the risk? So I think if we're
I
not
mean,
careful, we are stifling democracy.
I mean, I'm staggered by that. I mean,
Mm.
you know, for an MP to consider, you know, stopping doing the work they're doing because of these attacks would be to hand a victory to the very people who want to divide us and to destroy our democratic process.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, Sir David has left 5 children and grandchildren, and he's left a widow. Is that right? Should that have happened? Of course it shouldn't. But had he known that that was a possibility, would he have stood at the last election? We don't know, obviously. And he was a fierce, absolute fierce a champion of democracy. He believed in it absolutely, and he believed in serving his constituents. And what is so awful is ministers do have protection, they do have officers with them, but ordinary members of parliament never do. So is that right? Are we, because it's not ministers who generally are attacked, they might get the odd tomato or egg during an election, but have they ever been attacked and threatened with murder? I don't know, but you know, it's something that we're going to have to look at. And I know Priti Patel has said there's got to be um, a review of the situation with members of parliament over the next few weeks, and I hope she would come up with some solutions. But I don't know what those solutions can be. It's a conundrum and it's a balancing act, and we've got to try and get it right so that we do still see our constituents on a regular basis, but in a very safe way, because nobody should be threatened and murdered the way that Sir David was, because he was just doing his job, as we all do. Most weekends, we're all out there on a Friday seeing our constituents and going about our business to try and help people and try and solve the
So
problems that they have.
we don't see most of the work that you do, but how important is it
No.
to you to meet your constituents?
Oh, absolutely. Because some of the constituents that come to us are in a desperate situation. We are sometimes the last port of call. They don't know where else to go, and we're the ones that they turn to when they've been banging their heads against a brick wall, against institutions generally, whether it's the council or the health service or the education service. And I'm not blaming any of them, but we have to try and unlock that problem, and we have to try and solve the problem for constituents. It might be the CSA, it can be the pension service. DVLA is our biggest problem at the moment. We have to try and unlock that and solve the problems for our constituents, who are desperate very often. So we have to still see them, we have to deal with them, but maybe we don't see the people who are coming about campaigns. Maybe we just see casework people.
The thing that struck me when I read the news yesterday is that Sir David had spent 40 years, a lifetime, fighting for his constituents and for the public. That's an awful lot of experience as an MP to actually make a difference. You know, will that experience, his lack of experience, his experience be a loss now to the party?
Well, Of course, and we will hopefully get a very good candidate who will step into his shoes, but it'll be difficult, and obviously we're not even thinking about that at the moment because the police investigation has got to get underway. His family have got to sort out his personal things and his funeral, and so we won't be looking at a candidate just yet, but there will in time be a by-election, and we will be looking for somebody who can do a good job for Southend-on-Sea. And one of the things that I do hope will come out as a legacy is that Sir David was always championing for Southend to become a city, and I hope that that's something that we may do and grant his wish. Sadly, with him no longer there, but I mean, it's something that I know he would love to happen because he was always talking about it.
I
But
couldn't agree
he
with you
worked
more.
so hard.
I could not agree with you more. Thank you very much for being on the show, and I wish you a very safe future in the very important work that you do.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.